Hello and welcome to the Apologetic Dog. And it's been a little while since we were able to do a live stream, so thank you so much for your patience out there. I'm Jeremiah North here, and something that is in my heart in doing apologetics to the glory of God is 1 Timothy 6:20 that basically says, if you are in Christ by faith alone, looking to Christ alone, then we are to guard the deposit entrusted to us. We are to guard the gospel of grace. And so if you've been a long-time follower of the Apologetic Dog, I would like for you to prayerfully consider your support. And you can support by becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon. And obviously, I covet your prayers, so just keep me in prayer. And if you're able to help in a few other ways, just financially, that allows me to continue to pay the bills, if you will. And I do a lot of traveling and speaking at lectures, speaking at conferences with lectures and just all the things. And so if you would, please consider that. Another way you can support the ministry is by way of super chats. This is honestly one of my favorite ways that people can support, because this gives you a chance to interact with me. And another reason why your support is so important, because I host debates, whether I am engaging or hosting with two other people. And so if you like that kind of thing, just please consider doing super chats or becoming a member or Patreon. With that being said, I have a special guest this evening, Dr. Frost. How are you, sir?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
I'm good. How are you doing?
Thanks for joining me and the Apologetic Pound, the Dog Pound out there this evening. You are the pro at eschatology. I've learned so much, and so I got to have you back on from time to time.
It's good to be back on. And of course, we've been talking before then, so that's always good.
Yep. I wanted to update people.
I think the last time we talked, so now I'm a commissioned pastor.
Okay, so a lot has changed in your life.
A lot has changed. A lot has changed, and so that's a good thing. That's made my life quite busy.
So but a good busy.
It's a very good busy.
Yep,
For example, I was on the roof today of the church for about 4 hours, fixing an area.
Dr. Frost, you're supposed to have deacons to help you with those kind of things.
I'll do it.
Well, as a fellow pastor, I know what you mean by busy. Just the phone is always ringing, the text messages are always going, and I'm so grateful that my church family wants me to pursue apologetics, and so they're very intentional in trying to help me guard my time. But I'm like you, I can't help but to just keep stacking my plate with all these wonderful responsibilities. I can't see myself doing anything else, quite honest.
No, I'm very content these days in supportive family, supportive wife. My son actually is looking to go into ministry. He's there at Indiana University, but he's joined a wonderful Reformed Presbyterian church, and he's thinking of going to their seminary, which I believe is in Pittsburgh. So very, very content and happy these days.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. We need to update everyone a little bit with the drama, Dr. Frost, that you and I have stepped into.
New drama.
New drama. Well, so a mutual friend of ours, Eli Ayala, over at Revealed Apologetics. People go check out his channel if you haven't. Like and subscribe to his channel over there. He interviewed me recently, Dr. Frost, about why full preterism is heresy. And so, I had to bring in a little bit of Gary DeMar and get people kind of wound up a little bit. And I didn't realize that it would kick the hornet's nest like I did. But I was able for an hour and a half just to kind of dismantle full preterism inside and out. And a lot of that is due to your help answering my questions with eschatology. And, I used to be one of those pan mill, right? It's going to just pan out in the end. And I guess I still hold to that, but you've helped me bring some clarity there.
Yeah, I like pan-millennialism. I heard that back in Bible college in the 80s.
Is that really just an excuse, though, not to study eschatology?
For some people, I guess it is. Some people refuse to touch the subject. I've met, as I travel around in circles, churches. Some people, just don't. They don't want to touch it.
I have always been intrigued with eschatology, and I always love displaying Johnny Mac's commentary up here because he was so influential in my life, showing me a love for God's Word. And so I began with the dispensational premillennial eschatology,
Yeah.
but then over time realizing, wow, there's such good points to consider kind of outside of that paradigm. And, a few years ago, I think I suckered you back into the conversation of why hyper-preterism is bad. What is it, and how is it heresy? And so you've been throwing your hat in the debate arena on Donnie's channel.
Yeah, you're to blame for that, because I definitely was going to get out of the defending it, because I just want to pursue other subjects, other things. But it's been good. For example, let's see here. This just reminds me. I received an instant message. I get these a lot, from a gentleman that said, here it is. I won't tell his name. I wanted to reach out and thank you for your online presence and YouTube against full preterism. My brother has fell into this terrible doctrine, and you've helped equip me with the truth about bodily resurrection of believers and the second coming of Christ and the new heavens and new earth. You've been a tremendous help in my conversations with my older brother. And you've sent me a couple of
Oh yeah, well,
things like
and
that.
I don't even send you all of the. I don't even send you all that I get, but tons of people. Number one, are just intrigued and they like learning, because something I try to kind of contrast with full preterism are the answers and why they're wrong, and showing how Jesus Christ is ruling and reigning now, heavenly. He's on the clouds in glory, and we await for his second bodily return to consummate the kingdom, right? To bring heaven on earth. So I've been able to really lean into helping people, and it's been a great study for me. That's why you have me constantly texting you of saying, "What about this? What about this?" And you're like, "Well, let me tell you about the Greek and the Hebrew there."
Right. I try.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, Dr. Frost. So this kind of kicked the hornet's nest. Eli is actually on vacation right now. We filmed this and recorded it a number of weeks ago, and so he kind of was able to release it a couple weeks after the fact. But I was going to tell people, Mike Sullivan and Don Preston were not impressed. You know what I mean? And so they quickly called me and Eli out to do a 2-on-2 debate. And, they don't know Eli. And, Eli, he has done a few debates.
I've been on a couple of his shows. We talked about.
Oh, yeah. I think that's how I first knew how to call you, was because you were first interviewed by him, and you were distinguishing partial preterism from full preterism.
Yep. He does a good job.
Yes, and so they wanted him to debate, but they don't know him and what he does, what his day-to-day is. And so, yeah, it's easy for him to interview somebody like me or somebody like you, but this is not even on the bottom of the list to debate. It's not even on the list at all. He loves discussing full preterism, or eschatology, I should say, and he's had guys like Chris Date on, and I think he hosted a debate with Michael Miano and Chris Date on the resurrection of the dead. Eli's been one to inquire about this, but like I said, he's not interested in debating. So, Dr. Frost, I want to tell everybody that I saw this as an opportunity, because Mike Sullivan isn't your biggest fan. I don't know why, but we have constantly reached out to him, said, "Hey, let's have him on the show to debate you, either 1-on-1 or 2-on-2." And then just a lot of reasons why he doesn't want to do that. He really wants to debate you with a partial preterist. Obviously, we can see the game plan on their side is just to try to divide and conquer. So I saw this as an opportunity to call out him, Don Preston, Zach Davis, Travis Drum, of saying, all right, we're not scared to debate. In fact, we want to do this. We've just, I've constantly been, sounding the bullhorn, telling people how to sniff out full preterism from a distance, right before it gets to their doorstep. And so when I sent that out, Don Preston said, all right, let's dance. So we are currently in the process, me and yourself, we're trying to talk with Mike and Don about what kind of debate we want to set up. I've been pushing for an in-person debate. Those things may or may not happen. I know we all live, far away, and traveling and expenses and age and things like that. And so we'll see. It's funny, though, when someone says, hey, here's a proposition that I want you to defend. And so I usually like to have a conversation of what that looks like. But I'm excited. Hopefully that this can work out. It would be an honor getting to debate side by side with you.
So did we say yes?
We've been saying yes for a long time. You know what I mean? We got to iron out the details and a time and
I
things
was
like that.
surprised. I have to tell you the truth. I was not banking on them responding, not for mainly Don, but mainly Mike. So I was surprised. Now, if they had said, "Well, no, we wanted Eli. We don't want Sam," you know, that would have been par for the course. You know, I'm used to that. But here they said yes, and I'm like, okay, good, great, fantastic. But they want to do it. This Olivet Discourse foretold both the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, as well as a future to us second coming. I'd reword that different, and the end of the current Christian age. I would just put as well as a end of human history.
Exactly. Like I said, we definitely want to debate. We got to iron out some of these details, and hopefully Mike was not going to be like a make you accept or deny. He doesn't. I don't think he understands that these things go back and forth, and you meet somewhere in the middle. So there's time enough for him to back out and kind of whine to everybody that we didn't, play by his rules. But I'm hoping we can continue to talk about this because I want to do it. I personally would like to do it in person. So, so we'll see. I just wanted to update people a little bit with the drama that's ensued since I made that video about death wins. Because you know what, Dr. Frost? All this physical death that you see happening out there, it's just going to continue on forever.
Right. That's basically what they teach. It'll go on and for infinity. So it's because in their minds, the Bible doesn't talk about physical death at all. It's not a problem. It's not an issue, really. It's part of the glory to God. God instituted death, and He's instituted it for infinity. So you have to, since all things are towards the glory of God or for the glory of God, you would have to argue that physical death is for the glory of God, for infinity, and all the rest of the evil and sin that goes along with that. It's just, when I mention that point to church folks that I see, quite often from various denominations and this, that, and the other, they just shake their heads at that. That's the absurdity of it. But that's what it is.
Something else I point out is they have physical death being a part of God's very good creation. And so, that casts a kind of light on God that I think is very bad when He's created everything and it's good, and it's very good. Oh, but physical death, right, is a part, not only physical death, but decay and just disease and everything else. It's like the fall brought about certain consequences. And usually, everyone understands, all of Christendom for 2,000 years has understood the wages of sin is death. And so we look at death and we understand it's a result of sin. It's a curse, right? All those things. But full preterism has to say that the physicality of death is a good thing and is part of God's good design. So usually that will stop someone that's inquiring about eschatology in their tracks if they were starting to go down that track saying, oh man, well, obviously that's wrong. And I'm like, oh wait, there's more.
Well, the nature of God is eternal. That's one of His attributes, is his eternality. And absolutely. I guess when He started making the creatures of the sea, creeping things, He introduced, and God saw death, and that these creatures would die, and God saw that it was good. And there was so it just It boggles the mind. I think that the whole point of the narrative of Genesis, obviously, is he creates a tree of immortality there.
Yeah.
And the whole point, why have that tree there if he did not want, if his desire and purpose was not for man to enjoy him forever in the creation that he had made for man forever, to live on the earth forever. Why would he make a tree of immortal life or eternal life? Why would he do that? And the Hebrew is interesting there. It's plural, the tree of lives, which is a majesty plural. So it's a fullness of life. It's meant to, have this fullness of life. So why that tells me the purpose of God's creation is that man would enjoy him in the things that God had made for him to have dominion and glory and honor. Psalm 8, all of these psalms they all come into my head. So that's the purpose of God, not that man suffers in his creation for infinity. I mean, that's just goes against everything.
Yes. Well, hey, Dr. Frost, that's just a primer for everyone. Just letting them know about some of the impending drama that's out there. Hopefully me and you can get a debate with Don Preston and Mike Sullivan. We definitely want to debate. They kind of have a proposition out there. I think that's a good starting point that we can kind of talk with them, and hopefully we can do it in person. But if not, we have a number of debate venues that we would love to look at. So the reason why I have you on is I actually want us to examine a video where Zach Davis was critiquing Frank Turek, talking about the end of the age. And so it's interesting because, I've been kind of seeing some of Zach's content. I'm just like, man, I cannot, it's hard for me to see how people buy into this. But I thought maybe me and you could kind of point out some things for people to consider. And in fact, I want to just let everyone know that's tuning in. We would love to see some of your questions in the sidebar in the comments. We'd love to bring those up, and we really we would honor super chats, especially if you want to say something about the ministry or you have a specific question for Dr. Frost. This is your chance to do it, and I might be able to kind of weigh in also. So, Dr. Frost, are you ready to kind of see what Frank Turek has to say when it comes to eschatology?
And I'm not real familiar with Frank Turek. I have not read a lot of his stuff. I've heard of him. His name pops up in some of the things that I read. He's just not in my circle right now of anything that I'm currently reading or doing.
I want to say some positive things about Frank Turek. He's kind of an OG apologist. He goes on to students' campuses and he answers their questions about life, who God is, and he is very awesome and orthodox. He believes in the sovereign triune God, with Jesus being the second person of the Godhead. He believes in justification by faith apart from works. I do take dispute with Dr. Turek. He is a Molinist, and so I have a little bit of beef there, but that's in-house debate, Dr. Frost. And so I believe, as we're going to see here in a moment, a full preterist student, young person, comes up to the mic and asks Frank about the end of the age with the Olivet Discourse, and then Zach likes to chime in and provide some of his commentary. So I would like for us to critique Zach Davis doing a critique of Frank Turek. What do you say?
That's fine. Sounds good to me. I'm game.
All right. Let's jump in.
Frank Turek, reacting with full preterism at the University of Tennessee about a week and a half ago. I want you guys to check this out and see what kind of responses we get. See if we get anything that refutes anything. See how familiar these folks are with this. We're going to look at Frank Turek, and then later on he brings in the leading apologist at the University of Tennessee, and we'll see what she can do with preterism and what kind of responses we can give to this interview.
So I got a quick question. I noticed the full preterist crowd, they like to just use the word preterism. Do you think that is a subtle move of them trying to just reclaim that word versus the particularity within preterism?
Yeah, this goes back to 2000, Ed Stevens and we've been trying to hijack that term preterism and drop the word full. We're the true preterists, so we would use that word. But you need the word full added because the preteristic ideas have been around for 2000. I mean, you can go back to the church fathers. Everybody knew the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem and the exile and all of that. They all knew that. Irenaeus and Papias and Polycarp and Clement, and everyone was very well aware of all that kind of stuff. And I think in Matthew 24, as we'll get up here, speaks directly to that. I think that's quite obvious. But I think that's disingenuous when they do that.
Yeah, so our encouragement is when someone says that they're a preterist, you should say, what kind of preterist? Are you a partial preterist?
Right.
Do you see some
Right.
things happening in the past? And what do you see as future? Or ask someone, oh, are you a full preterist? I've been warned about you.
Right. You're right. Right. I think that's the question you do need to ask.
Interaction. Now, kudos to them for having to interact, but it's a public forum, so they have to. So let's check it out.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hey, sir. I'm Judah.
Judah.
Yep.
From the tribe of
Yeah, the terrible
Judah.
dude.
Go ahead.
So I kind of have grew up dispensationalist
Uh-huh.
and with this futuristic mindset of Jesus physically coming back. But I've recently come to a different point of view. To preface, throughout the Old Testament, you have this day of the Lord that happens. And a lot of the times there's time statements like near, soon.
You're going to have to be a little louder, Judah, for the people in the back. Unfortunately, that
Sorry.
mic is not
I have
amplified.
to do that. Okay.
So go ahead.
So there's time statements like
Yeah.
near, soon, quickly,
Yeah.
about day of the Lord, so
Right.
like Babylon, Assyria.
Uh-huh.
And then when we get to the New Testament with the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, and even Revelation, with those time statements also being soon, near, quickly, at hand, if I'm a first century Jew or even a non-Jew, a Gentile, if I'm reading these New Testament documents, would you think that they think that that event would happen soon and quickly, given the destruction of the temple in 70
I think the
AD?
Olivet.
Dr. Frost, so he mentioned some timing indicators, things
Yeah.
that are going to happen soon, at hand. Other passages talk about Jesus is at the door. Can you speak a little bit to the timing indicators? Because you listen how he kind of set up his question and inquiry. You know, he is just like, from a first century perspective, wouldn't these people think that something is going to happen within this 40-year generation?
Yeah, the whole basis, and I've got a few of them here. 40 full preterist books in my library. They're way back there.
Didn't you write some back in the
And I
day?
wrote two of them, yeah. Misplaced Hope
Yeah.
and Exegetical Essays. Actually, in a chapter for House Divided, which Mike Sullivan wrote most of it with David Green. In all of these books, and as being a former full preterist speaker and teacher myself, that spoke with Don Preston and Ed Stevens and Jack Scott and Larry Siegel and Dave Curtis, and I could go down the list, at well over 20 conferences across the United States. The entire basis of full preterism is what they call these time texts. That is the capital T foundation. And that's without that, all of these other considerations that they bring up just completely fall apart. And so that's and people will set this up without any study of what does everyone take the phrase at hand in a temporal sense. Well, let me read you real quick an example, because I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail here, as we will in the debate. But here's Ben Witherington III, who's no slouch. This is probably one of the top 50 scholars today that's very well respected internationally. He's done wonderful work on his socio-cultural commentary series that he's done. Just one of the, I love reading it. But anyway, he's a scholar, I guess. Um, I'm a dwarf compared to him.
Mm.
But he says here, Philippians 4:4-5 says, "Rejoice in the Lord always." And again, I say rejoice. The Lord is near, or the Lord is at hand. Now, here one needs to know the Old Testament texts Paul has in mind when he offers these imperatives. He likely has in mind Psalm 145:18. The Lord is at hand to those who call upon him.
Yep.
Or possibly Psalm 34:18. The Lord is at hand to the brokenhearted. I actually read this after my own work and study, going back to the Hebrew scriptures, looking at the Septuagint, looking for that phrase "at hand." And it's remarkable how many "the Lord is at hand" phrases that are there exactly as they are found in the New Testament. And so that, and then reading somebody like Witherington, and then there's many others who's seeing that as well. I'm like, okay, that just means if I do these things by the finger of God, then the kingdom of God, perfect tense, has come upon you. I thought, okay, he's not saying the kingdom of God is at hand in about 30 years when the Jerusalem temple falls. That's being read into the text. But they do set you up like this, using
Right.
these English words like soon and about to and near and yeah, well, yeah, yeah. Yes. But
Now,
go ahead.
something I want to mention that you've brought out in the past is you can use the timing indicators against him to show in Ephesians 4 that the church has reached full consummation if you read the timing indicators like that. And we're living in a world post-church. And so we might bring up some of those points later. I want to read to you a comment that someone put in the side chat. And I want your kind of thoughts on it. So this individual says, ex-dispensational premillennial person here, now all millennial, reading a preterism book at the moment, but it's making me feel like one could actually lose the faith if you keep going the full preterism route. It's very unsettling. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to how that's the train that you're on when you buy into this idea that you're living post-redemptive history. There's nothing left.
Right. And many within full preterism, they don't all affirm this. The ones that don't affirm it are really trying to put together a post-70 AD ecclesiology, a post-70 AD soteriology. And because they realize they have to give an account for 1900 years too. It's not, you have to give an account for 1900 years. Jesus said near for 1900. Well, the full preterist has to tell me, well, what has God been doing for 1900 years? Because nobody knows about the second coming in 70 AD. So where did they drop the ball on that one? So you do have to go back and reinvent ecclesiology, soteriology, pneumatology, Christology. You've got to go right on back, because all theology, every systematic theology you have behind you. I notice you've got Turek back there too. That's a good set. Or even John MacArthur, so it doesn't make any difference. All of Christian theology has been worked out from the standpoint of the beginning to the end, a consummation, wherein all is consummated and then brought into glory and honor. And all theology in between that, so soteriology, the definition of faith, the definition of hope. Hope is a very important word in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. It's a very important word. You have to redefine death. We talked about earlier, death. You've got to redefine that. You have to redefine resurrection of the dead. You have to redefine that. You have to redefine that Jesus doesn't have his human body anymore, which they do. Now they'll stare you in the face and tell you what's wrong with that. Well, there's everything wrong with that. When you have to redefine the entire Christian catalog on the basis of what you have supposed these time texts are, and so on the basis of these time texts, you're redefining the entire catalog of Christian theology. might, as this gentleman has noted, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
I don't do it for any other doctrine.
Here's a good question, too. I'd like to get first cracks at it, and maybe in just a couple sentences you
sure.
can share your thoughts, too. This person, Justin, says, should I be all-millennial or post-millennial? I'm leaning a little bit post-millennial, Dr. Frost, because of Joel chapter 3, but yeah. So I want to say, number one, brothers in the faith, love post-millennial brothers. Know Jeff Durbin,
Oh, yeah.
know a lot of the guys at Apologia, Dr. James White, good friend of mine, post-mill, Doug Wilson, been on the show,
Yep.
post-mill, a lot of the Puritans. So I just want to say, you're in a good, space if you're asking this, even premillennial brothers. Here's my quick pitch of saying what I like about the harmony of all mill in contrast to post mill is I believe Paul told the church we would suffer. Okay, and so something built in post millennial thought is an increase in righteousness to the vanishing of wickedness. And I'm saying downstream, you're just not going to have the kind of suffering and persecution that Paul told the church that they would have. So that's number one. Number two, I also like to bring out that Matthew 25 and in the parable of the virgins, we are to be ready for Christ's return at any moment. Well, a part of the post-millennial battle cry is we're in the early days of the church, not the last days, and so we have a lot of work to do to evangelize the world so Christ can return. Well, I think if you're honest at that point, then Christ could not return at any moment. And so that's just something to consider that I think All Mill beautifully accounts for. We are waiting for Christ's imminent physical future return. It could happen at any moment, and we are victorious here and now through suffering. So what do you think, Dr. Frost?
I really wouldn't add a word to that. There's a sign driving to my church of Smyrna Baptist Church. And on the way there, and on the sign it says, Jesus could return today. I thought,
I like the Baptist
post-millennial
part
say
in there.
that? Yeah, Jesus
Post-mill
could
can't
return
say
today.
that.
And I said, and I thought, well, yeah, post-mill can't really say that. I can.
Any thoughts with Joel 3? I'm not
Jesus
really
is ready
sure.
to judge the living and the dead.
I'm not sure what Joel 3 references. I know Joel 2 in reference to Acts chapter 2, and all that is proof that Jesus is ruling and reigning now. So good question with Joel 3. Dr. Frost may have to kind of come back on that, but that's my quick pitch for why I don't think post-mill properly accounts for a lot of the data that we have. And that's just getting the conversation barely started. That's just my quick pitch.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I don't want to get in. I'm reading Joel 3. here, and I don't want
Good question, Justin. All right, Dr. Frost, we're going to go ahead and continue to play the video.
Discourse in Matthew 24, there's a near-term fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. The near-term fulfillment was 70 AD. The long-term fulfillment is going to be when Jesus comes back.
Okay. We're going to make 8070 a type, according to Frank here. Now, let's look for the whole video. Whenever we see Frank give us the verse that tells us about the future beyond 8070 comings that are here.
So where does he specify the second fulfillment?
Well, this is common among New Testament prophecies, as you know. There's normally a near-term fulfillment, so the people at that time can understand it came true, but then there's a longer-term fulfillment as well.
100% wrong. Please hear me here. 100% wrong. He says that oftentimes in the New Testament, there's a near-term fulfillment and then a future, far-off fulfillment. Friends, that is one of the biggest issues in understanding the New Testament and the Bible. That's a true statement if he would have said, in the Old Testament, there are oftentimes an immediate near-term fulfillment and then a future far-off fulfillment. Jesus says explicitly in Luke 21:22, these are the days of vengeance, which all things written in the Old Testament are to be fulfilled. You do not type things when you have the reality present. And the reality is Jesus in the New Covenant in the first century. Let me give you an example. David was told when he dies that his son would sit on his throne and build a house for the name of God. That's true for Solomon. He's the son of David that reigned and built a physical temple on the throne in Jerusalem after David died. But Peter in Acts chapter 2 applies the ultimate fulfillment of that to Jesus when he was raised from the dead and is seated on the throne reigning from the new spiritual temple, Mount Zion in heaven. You do not type things in the New Testament. Friends, what's greater than Jesus? Absolutely nothing. What Frank Turek just said is 100% absolutely an error. And
Dr. Frost, do you want to speak to any of that? Is there any validity to what Zach is saying? Do you see any errors with what Frank Turek said?
Yeah, I think what Frank said is the reason why many people become full preterists. I think that's not it's not the best way to say things like that, because clearly at that point you're using a methodology there, and so the methodology then becomes, and everyone has a methodology. The methodology then becomes the technique through which you interpret or read a text, through how the methodology would work. And that particular one of telescoping. Now he says typology there. Frank's not saying typology. I don't know if Frank was meaning that. That's a different thing that he's doing. Frank didn't mention typology. Zach did, but Frank just said there's a near fulfillment aspect. It could be a partiality, but the fullness of the aspect to be fulfilled will come at its consummation. You read this stuff is all over the place in evangelical literature. I wouldn't approach it that way, but the way that he does, but it is here that full preterists like Zach here. But there's the second point. Well, actually, the second point is Zach is far more handsome than I am. That's probably a drawing point or something. How could a guy as handsome as Zach be wrong?
He's got a good tan going on.
He's got a good, yeah. He does. I'm kind of. Anyway, notice what he did with Luke 21:22, and you'll find this often. He says, "For these be the days of vengeance, as a fulfillment of all that was written in the Old Testament." Right.
Right.
And then that's it. That's all he quotes. And it sounds like, oh yeah, see, these be the days of vengeance of all that is written. All of the sudden, the word "all" takes on a literal meaning there. But anyway, woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing infants in those days. There will be great distress on the earth and wrath against this people. Okay, so far I would say that he's referring to Jerusalem there. The Jerusalem, Judah, will fall by the edge of the sword and be taken away as captives among all, here's the word all again, all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled on by the nations until the times of the nations are fulfilled.
That's just the known world, Dr.
Times of the nations. Huh?
That's just the known world.
Yeah, right. So what's this? The times of the nations be fulfilled. And that right there introduces a whole other area that, and Luke is, in New Testament scholars, Luke is clearly not, you will long to see one of the days of Son of Man, but you will not see it. He tells his disciples this, you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, but you will not see it. Luke goes out of his way. If the finger of God does these things, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. There are several different types of things that Luke's doing, but he just quotes one verse. That's dog whistle. Oh, you're the dog whistle. You're the apologetic.
Woof, 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 woof.
Yeah,
that's right. I've been summoned.
So,
but what you're saying is there's a lot loaded into that proof text.
There's a lot. Yes, and they will use these proof texts just like a dispensationalist or listening to John Hagee or somebody. It's just, or Jack Van Impe. I used to watch Jack Van Impe and his wife Roxella, and he would just rifle off these scripture verses. Most of them he never quoted. He would just just rifle them off. And you'll find full preterists doing that kind of thing. I prefer a more slower method, slower, cautious. Let's read the text. Let's read some commentaries. Let's see what's going on here. But anyway, I don't want to take all the.
No, you're good. We have a question. I think this actually can be very beneficial. Maybe we touch on it for just another minute or so, but kind of a question for you, Dr. Frost. Disregarding the time words like soon, at hand, mellow, in the Greek, whatever, should we consider things like Revelation 1 where John says our rescue is coming? How can they have comfort if it's so far in the future? Did you want to say anything with that?
I don't know where he says your rescue is coming. He might be alluding, to the words like quickly. Again, Witherington in the book, wherever I misplaced it, Witherington notes that the phrase "entake," it's prepositional adverbial phrase "entake," quickly. You look it up in the Septuagint. It occurs quite often. It's in the classic literature that I read as well, and basically means quickly. So Psalm 2, kiss the Son, lest his wrath flare up, entake, quickly. That's all that's saying. It's not. Now some people do translate it as soon. I don't. I'm of the side, legitimately so. You may disagree with me, but that's fine. Is swiftly. These things, plural, must take place. When each of these things take place, they will take place swiftly, quickly. Just out of the blue. The best example I could think of, if you remember 2020, so you had the elections and you had January and then you had February, and you kind of started hearing about this COVID thing, but you weren't really thinking anything about it. And then by the end of February, holy cow, the whole thing just COVID, like came out of nowhere quickly. That's what that means.
And here's the hope.
But anyway,
here's the hope. Christ's kingdom is inaugurated. If you have the eye of faith, you can see the kingdom of God. But Christ is returning to restore all things. Evil, sin, the physicality of death, this is not going to be unanswered. But we can have a blessed hope that Christ is returning to restore all things and to resurrect us to be with him for all eternity. So to me, I feel bad for questions like that because I can tell that mindset is so entrenched with, if Jesus did not, return in that lifetime in this kind of proto-Gnostic way, then
there's your time
they're
text
not
again.
Yeah. For them, I hate that they cannot see that there is much hope that fuels us to get up each and every day to live to the glory of God because we are salt and light in this world. That wasn't just a first century relevance and already fulfilled.
And I would answer, I'm greatly encouraged. I preach through Revelation at our church and to other places. I would be greatly encouraged of knowing the chaos currently right now around us when you look at the world. But my eyes are on the Lamb of God who's been exalted above all things and is given glory, honor, power, authority, and might. And he's the one that has the trumpets and the bowls, and he's the one he's at the right hand of the Father. He's the one that's, so in spite of the wars and political and suffering and all the things the Lamb is upon the throne. And that's a wonderful encouragement to me, which the theme of the book of Revelation is patient endurance. Patient endurance. How many people in Jesus's parable fall away because of tribulation and persecution? They fall away, or their life is just not going the way that they thought it was supposed to go with all this Jesus and church stuff. And so, but I gave up, because my wife got cancer, which my wife has cancer, by the way, in remission. So we have to deal with it. I deal with this stuff all the time as a pastor. Read Revelation as a pastor, John. And so it's greatly encouraging that Jesus quickly is very well aware of the situations of my life and what's going on. And he comes quickly. Read the Psalms. Lord, save me. Lord, deliver me. Lord, rescue me. Lord, do, all these types of things. Well, he does, doesn't he? He's rescued me several times. I could look back at my life and like, the Lord delivered me there. Man, I could have lost my life on that one. So I think Revelation should be read with the Psalms deeply in mind, because there's just allusions of Psalms and all throughout Revelation. There's been whole studies about that.
Dr. Frost, I was
Anyway.
going to ask you. I want to know some good resources and recommendations that you have, maybe on the Book of Revelation. So obviously, you have a teaching series. Maybe that's public. I want to say I have a commentary written by Dr. Sam Storms. It's kind of one of his newest commentary.
I have that. My
commentaries.
son just bought me that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to kind of opening that up. And then G.K. Bill is something that you recommended
Yes.
to me a while back. So is there any other resources that you have for people for the Book
Yeah,
of Revelation?
Bill. I mean, Bill's a good place, and then just look through his footnotes, the Greek New Testament commentary that he's got. That's the best commentary on Revelation. That's the number one that I recommend. D.A. Carson's commentary on Matthew.
Oh, yeah. You recommended me that
And
recently.
and this one right here. Who is this Babylon by Don K. Preston? No, I don't recommend that one.
Well, hey, circling back to Zach Davis, so he's onto something here of saying you can't just presuppose a bald typology going on, because we do see that in the Old Testament, but we know it because of what the New Testament revelation says. And so it does seem to leave kind of a begging the question, if you will, if you just kind of assert a telescoping without further justification. So is that right?
Yeah.
All
I
right,
didn't
Zach
like
Davis.
Frank's answer, so
Yeah. All right, let's hear what Zach has to say.
It will mess you up reading the Bible if you take that approach. Let's keep going.
Take a look at in Matthew 24, where Jesus says, when you see the armies descending on Jerusalem, flee to the mountains. Well, that's what the Christians did in 70 AD.
Right.
Just about all of them escaped the destruction. But if he's talking just about the end of the world, does it make any sense to flee to the mountains? No, of course not, right? The mountains are going to be gone too. So there's a near-term fulfillment and a long-term fulfillment. So when he says these things are going to happen before this generation passes away, I think he meant the generation at the time. That's the natural reading there.
Right.
And about 40 years after he said that, that's when it happened. One generation.
Great. Frank's a preterist. Of some degree. He wouldn't say that, but it sounds like it. Here we go, Frank. Give us a verse now. We want a verse for
By the way, everyone is a preterist to some degree by that standard if you think the virgin birth prophecies were fulfilled in the past. So I'm just saying, you got to be careful of letting someone stack the deck in that kind of conversation, because when someone says they're a preterist, they're not talking about in the historic Christian sense. Well, of course, Jesus' first coming was fulfilling Old Testament prophecy.
the future.
It's just
fulfillment
Latin.
past 80-70.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's a Latin phrase. It just means that something. Here's three questions of church eschatology. The three questions are: what has been fulfilled, what is now being fulfilled, what is yet to be fulfilled. Those are the three questions of eschatology. So everybody has. Jesus fulfilled the Bethlehem birth. So that's a one-time fulfillment. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and the colt being tied to a tree, and he rode into in Zechariah 9, and there it is, and that's that. But to call me a preterist because I have these past fulfillments of the life of Jesus, that's a little disingenuous too. I use a past understanding of past fulfillments of certain events that have happened, but I wouldn't call me a preterist as a result of that.
Yeah, because as we get into the Olivet Discourse here in a moment, do you think it's fair if to some part of that discourse Jesus was talking about the destruction of the temple? Does that warrant being a preterist to some degree, or do we say no, that already entails a whole package deal?
Yeah. I think that kind of distinction needs to be made, because again, John Calvin understands. I mean, you could go down the list: Martin Luther. I mean, it's like I said, it's well known. I think even old Johnny Mack back there in your commentary series, go to Matthew 24, has something to say about 70 AD. Of course he does.
I love Johnny Mack. Yeah, and Luke's account really emphasizes the Roman army. So yeah, I mean, this is just a reality of the Christian faith.
But there's also a longer term fulfillment when Jesus comes again. So I think it's both.
Okay.
All right.
Do you know where he says that?
Says
though?
what?
About a long term, because here's the thing with the dual fulfillment for me,
Uh-huh.
at least, and how I see it is, why can't there be a third, a fourth, or even
I just want to say briefly what this gentleman is doing is saying it feels arbitrary, right? Now, I would caution, even though we're talking about how you got to have more in the context to show a dual fulfillment, but I can't recall of anything that's a triple fourth fulfillment like he's talking about. So there is biblical warrant for a kind of, near fulfillment that's showing something far. So to me, this isn't as arbitrary as the full preterist wants to make it sound.
It's a common method among many others, and you see it. I would square all of that up with, they ask about the end of the age, and that didn't happen in 70 AD. Now, of course, they say that it did, but but anyway, I think we're
let me
coming
pause
to
you
that.
there, because that's exactly what they're about to get
besides
into.
symbolic
That's what
ones
tells
from
me.
the Old Testament, also third and fourth in our day today.
Well, clearly not everything in Matthew 24 has happened. So there has to be
So did Jesus
a sense
lie?
that he's talking about this aspect. And look, we'd have to read the whole thing. We don't have time to read the whole thing.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
We don't have to read the whole thing, Frank. Just give us one verse that's in the future. I bet if Frank gives one verse that's in the future, the guy asking the question could pin him and say, no, here's why that happened in the first century. Friend,
Well, full preterists obsess over this. So, I bet this guy would
the whole thing.
want Frank to talk about the end of the age not being in 70 AD or so forth. So, this is what they constantly harp on and talk about.
if some of you are new to eschatology, maybe you're new to the idea that there are New Testament fulfillments that happened in the first century in 70 AD, let me just encourage you with this. Jesus said everything would happen in this generation, which is 40 years according to Hebrews 4. By the end,
Do you want to speak to that?
He didn't say that.
What is he getting at when he says, let me actually back it up,
Yeah.
because he said everything is, I know what he talks about in Olivet Discourse, but then he appealed to Hebrews 4 to make that point. Here, let me back it up 30 seconds.
We don't have time to read the whole thing.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
we don't have to read the whole thing, Frank. Just give us one verse that's in the future. I bet if Frank gives one verse that's in the future, the guy asking the question could pin him and say, no, here's why that happened in the first century. Friends, if some of you are new to eschatology, maybe you're new to the idea that there are New Testament fulfillments that happened in the first century in 70 AD, let me just encourage you with this. Jesus said everything would happen in this generation, which is 40 years according to Hebrews 4. By the end of the New Testament, you
Okay, yeah, I see that. You see how again, the guy that's asking the question, did Jesus lie? See,
Right, exactly.
I'm starting to get you in the corner here. Did Jesus lie? Well, you don't believe Jesus lied, do you? Now, let me say this: if what Zach is saying is true, then the majority of the church today, as well as the majority of the church for 1900 years, has been teaching in the name of Jesus that Jesus is a liar. And I teach that Jesus is a liar as a pastor, that Jeremiah, you teach your doctrine makes Jesus out to be a liar. And so what does that make you? When you are knowingly teaching something,
Right.
that
I
Jesus
share in those
is-
lies.
Yeah, right. So if I'm going to listen to what's being said here, do you honestly? So John Calvin's a liar. John MacArthur's a liar. They're all liars. The councils, the creeds, the confessions. I guess Zach is Baptist, right? So all of that, all of his Baptist heritage, they're all liars.
He left Baptist a long time ago, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, so he goes into that, and then you get to this generation, and here's your time text again. Here's the entire 110% foundation of full preterism as time text. And you'll notice in this 8 minutes, his major point that he's brought up constantly are the time text. That's what he constantly keeps going back to. So any argument that you're going to have, what about resurrection of the dead? 70 AD. Well, what about Jesus, 1 Thessalonians 4 descending? 70 AD. What about the language of the sun shall be darkened and all of the, that kind of language there? 70 AD. So 70 AD now becomes, on the basis of their interpretation of the time text, becomes a way by which you have to now reinterpret what were once normally thought of as safe categories.
This is what I would say to the gentleman there. I would just say, well, if that's your interpretation of Jesus and Olivet Discourse, then the Apostle Paul is a liar in 1 Corinthians 15, and he's not inspired. So it's, to me, we're really, skirting around the issues because we don't believe that they're liars. It's our interpretation and holistic understanding of how these things come together. So I do think it's disingenuous to say that, but we proceed.
It soon, at hand, judges at the door, about to happen quickly. The reason that's true is because all these events are talking about the destruction of the old system that was in play.
Ooh, the old system. Did you ever use that terminology?
Yes. Yeah, I did. Notice he's starting to shift here. And I think he talks about end of the age coming up here. So that now you got to talk about the end of what? It's not just that the temple was destroyed, and that's happened before 586. That's happened. It's not that Jerusalem or Judah was destroyed. I mean, that the land is still there. It's always been there. It never went anywhere, even though, a lot of other people that were non-Israeli or non-Jewish moved into the area, but the land is still there. It's always been there. In fact, we can dig it up, which we're doing right now with the city of David and other things, and the old city of David. So it's still there. He has to move into the end of an old system because he realizes it can't just be about a historic event. It must also be about a more global, universal kind of thing. And so now he's going to get into the end of the old system. And I guess we're in the new system now. But now you have to tell me what this gospel of the new system is. What's the good news gospel of the new system?
Now, Zach is kind of like Gary DeMar and some of those that say you take fulfillment and apply it, right? Weren't you in those same kind of conversations back in the 90s and so forth?
When we were leaving, Jason Bradfield, and who's written some I'm not writing much on Gary DeMar because Jason Bradfield is just, you don't need to say anything else after you read his articles. So Jason has just masterfully dealt with the issue. But he and I both were full preterists. And before we both left, he left a little earlier than I did. We were working on this thing called ongoing fulfillment because we realized there still has to be application. And so we were using John Murray's book, Redemption Accomplished and Applied. I was using because I had that in seminary. So I thought, here's a good model for post, like we began the episode here, Jeremiah, post 70 AD. You have to deal with it. And so redemption accomplished and applied. The only problem is it doesn't work. Because where does the Bible talk about redemption accomplished and applied? That's a method. That becomes a method now. So now you're Mr. Full Preterist. You're using a method. You accuse others of using methods. Here's the news is we all use methods. It's whether or not it's a correct method or not. You can't have the fulfillment of everything in 70 AD and then apply that. Where does the Bible tell us to do that? You and I, Jeremiah, don't run into that problem. When it's fulfilled, there's nothing left to apply because we're perfect. Everything we're.
What about in Revelation 22, since you've never read Revelation out there, the bride say, come, and you say it to all those who are outside of the kingdom. Is that not giving us justification to continue evangelizing the lost?
Yeah. The only issue there is the New Jerusalem is in heaven. And so the invitation that is to come. So you have the New Jerusalem that's in heaven, and then those on the outside, that's the earth, but that's where the invitation and the gospel. So you have an angel flying mid. There's one, I think it's Revelation 14, where the gospel is an angel is flying with wings of eagles, proclaiming the gospel mid heaven, in between heaven and earth. The gospel is being proclaimed. As long as the gospel is being proclaimed, the New Jerusalem is in heaven, and the invitation is being sent out. There's a parable on this. Jesus says that their king was an invitation to the wedding banquet, and then what will he do? And he'll destroy those kings, and then after he destroys the city and that king, he'll send out invitations. So that's the case. Then the invitation, not the consummation, you're being invited to the consummation, which has not happened yet. If it's already happened, I missed the party and I'm not being invited. There's no invitation to have because the event's already happened.
Because when I've heard Zach peddle this, I'm like, you contradict the Great Commission that you already say is fulfilled. So we have a good question here, and maybe I can offer my 2 cents, and you talk about this for a second too. Question is, what is the best method to read the Bible? There are some that say the most literal or the most natural is literal. So what hermeneutics should be used? I kind of point to 2 methods, Dr. Frost. Number 1, you got the grammatic historic method of interpretation. There is a first century audience relevance. What did the speaker, author mean when they said what they said, and how did the hearers, understand that? So that is wonderful. That's good. That's where we should all start. And then I also say the redemptive historic method of interpretation is our guiding hermeneutic is not 70 AD. It's not baptism. Yeah. It's not the visible church like a lot of these different groups have. But it's Jesus Christ. We take Jesus Christ with us when we go into the Old Testament, when we go into the epistles written to the churches. Jesus Christ is our guiding hermeneutic. So everything is filtered in through who Christ is. That's usually my quick recommendations.
I wouldn't add anything to that. The Bible has different genres. There's different things that are going on. So when I'm asked a question like that, I said, well, how do you interpret? Well, what passage are you talking about? What passage would you like to see interpreted? And then we'll start there. Are you in Song of Solomon? Are you in Ecclesiastes? Are you in Isaiah?
You mean you don't start at the end at 7 AD and interpret everything in light of that?
Yeah, which is a method, by the way.
Yeah,
I remember studying the Bible in 2005, 6, 7, 8 when I was doing a lot of lectures and stuff. And my only purpose for studying the Bible was to locate each and every verse to 70 AD. That was really the only.
I tell people biblical theology, there's an organic unfolding from Genesis to Revelation. So if you're starting at the end, you've got it backwards. You start with the beginning and see how it unravels. And the redemptive historic method says, hey, we even see we see Jesus there in Genesis 1. We see Jesus there in Revelation 22. All right. No, that was good. That was a good question.
Whenever these things were said, he's got to give a verse that says, okay, this happens post 80, 70. You're not going to hear one, spoiler alert.
I want to give Zach a little bit of credit here because I think that needs to be shown. Now, help me here. Premillennial dispensationalists, they will kind of say, you see the moon falling and the stars and kind of these big cataclysmic events happening. They would say that is hard literal, and we don't know of anything in history that did that. So this is talking about a future event, something to that effect.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, but now, we like the fact that some people are saying, hey, there is something in the context that is not yet, without just kind of arbitrarily assuming a kind of dual fulfillment.
Right. I asked this question to Don Preston. I never got a response back to it. Or I could ask it to Zach here. If Isaiah 13 is being quoted there or alluded to, sun turning to darkness, or Joel 2, but most likely Isaiah 13
definitely
is being there. And Jesus came to fulfill that. Then was it fulfilled when Isaiah spoke in Isaiah 13?
Dual fulfillment.
Yeah. So right there, if you think that was fulfilled in Isaiah 13 in this apocalyptic language that's being used for Babylon being conquered by the Persians, and it's using that kind of language to describe that, or it could be that I'm going to destroy all flesh, but Noah found grace in the eyes of God. And if you read Joel, in Joel chapter 2, he says, after he mentions day of the Lord and all of this, and he goes through this sun turning to blood and everything, he then says, who knows, the Lord may relent. So this day that has been set in which God will judge the world through a man, this is Acts 17, a day has been set. Well, what day is that? Is that the day when God turns out the lights, which he has threatened to do many times, but he always, do you not know that the patience of God and his loving kindness leads you to repentance? You who are storing up wrath for yourself in the day when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. That's Romans chapter 2. So God has not brought total destruction as he has stated. He has fixed a day wherein now we know that that day is fixed, but I don't know when. Jesus explicitly tells me that of that day, no man knows the day or the hour. So I can read this very easily as understanding that. It wouldn't make any sense to say, well, no one knows the day or the hour, but this generation, you know, it's going to happen in this generation, even though no one knows the, you know, the day or the hour. And like, oh, thanks, Jesus. So
when, because obviously Zach sees that as Isaiah 13. So would Zach be the one that would just claim dual fulfillment there?
Yeah, he would have to say that that's descriptive. If I'm listening to him correctly, if he's like Don Preston, that Isaiah 13 is using apocalyptic language, decreation language, to describe the fall of Babylon, a historical event. And so Jesus is using apocalyptic language, decreation language, to describe a historical event, cataclysmic event, the fall of Jerusalem. So the dispensationalists and the now most well, see, this is going to get involved. Most people understand that language is decreation language as the end. That's the last day. That's the end. Lights out. That's it. Which makes me wonder, when they said end of the age, why would Jesus bring out this just really fantastic language of decreation? Because that's what they're asking. When is when is God going to fulfill what he said in Isaiah 13? The sun turning to blood, moon darkening, and the, you know, stars and all this. Now, people will make fun of that. Well, you believe the stars literally will fall? It's you don't. The choice is not either or. It's a way, a full way of expressing something that clearly has not yet happened. And when it does happen, Zach and I and you are not going to be debating about it. It will be understood. God has acted, and the consummation of what God has done will be, there won't be any debate. It'll be very, very clear that God has broken into time and history, and lights out. That's it. God is not going to contend with man forever. Genesis 6, my spirit will not contend with man forever. He is but flesh. Right there, he's telling you, I'm not going to contend with man forever. For infinity. I'm not going to do this for infinity.
Well, I liked how you said it doesn't have to be a hard either or, unless you've already presupposed what the end already means. So let's get back to it.
In this whole exchange and interaction.
So some things happened in 70 AD. Some things have yet to happen in the Olivet Discourse. But he said this is going to happen before the end of the age. The end of the age was when the temple went down.
Y'all hear that?
Oh, no, Frank. He done did it.
Now, when Frank says something like that, and some evangelicals will, here you get your partial preterists.
Right.
When you say something like that, you're basically giving the farm away right there.
I was going to ask,
how do you pretty sloppy
how do you come back from that?
Part.
How do you come back from saying?
You gave me, as a full preterist, you gave me everything I wanted to hear right there. That's it. We're done. Now, Kenneth Gentry, Dr. Gentry, to his credit, used to say that back in the early days in the 90s, and he had that in his material. He has since changed that. He's no longer an advocate of that, and I applaud him that he came around to see that end of the age was not 70 AD. They weren't asking that. But when you get kind of a sloppy response like Frank just gave there, if I'm a full preterist, I'm done. We're good.
You're partying.
You gave it. We're we're finished here.
So
That
let me ask you
happens.
this. What have you heard some of the partial preterist advocates, though, that do say, well, this is what I've noticed with Gary DeMar over the years. This was really
absolutely.
huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would be some of the responses to try to salvage? Now, I've heard, they immediately point to the creeds, but is there any trying exegetically to point out, once you've said the end of the age is the end of the destruction of the temple, what do you do from that point? I know consistently you can't do anything, but what's the attempt?
When you do look at the creeds, which explicitly state, and we look forward to the age to come, Chalcedon uses the phrase "in these last days," so that's written in 451. So they viewed that age to come as something that's future. So meaning that the end of the age is something that we're currently, in or looking, or modern present, the present, until the age to come. Yes, the creeds are not inspired, but I want to know why the majority of the church was saying that. What were they? How were they understanding end of the age? What was coming to mind? Where were they getting? Well, of course, they were getting it from the scriptures and their interpretation of scriptures. And these are people who lived pretty close to the time of Jerusalem's destruction, and they knew very well about the Arch of Titus if they lived in Rome. By 81 AD, that Arch of Titus was built. Everybody knew this. Judah and Jerusalem is no longer there. But they did not associate that with the end of the age. And I'd like to know why they didn't. Well, they've got very good reasons why they didn't, because that's just not what end of the age means. The end of the age is that's the last day. That's it. That's when the manifestation of the light of God that's in Jesus Christ, that's currently residing in these jars of clay, will be made manifest, will be made known. Right now, it's hidden. It's mystery. It's hidden. You have to have faith. We walk by faith. So it gets into those kinds of categories, and now I'm into soteriology. Now, see, I've wandered right into that subject, because now we're talking about faith. And the other reason is, like Matthew 13 tells us the end of the age and what end of the age is. And then Matthew, you mentioned the Great Commission.
Speaking of Matthew 13, maybe this would be a good time to say, look, when Matthew 24, because, Jesus is talking, the question asked to him was, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And so, like you're kind of developing, is Jesus has already taught on what this is before Matthew 24.
Yeah.
And so do you think going to Matthew 13...
He's the only one that uses that phrase. Matthew's the only one that
Matthew's
uses
account.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, so here in Matthew 13, Jesus gives the parable of the weeds, and when he's explaining it. And so do you think this is probably the best place to kind of say, hey, this is what Jesus was initially talking about when he brings up the end of the age?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's what I do. You want to talk about Matthew 24?
Yeah.
Well, let me take you back to Matthew 13.
And so kind of the key here, and in fact, I'll just kind of read it, and then I'd love kind of you to continue to expound upon it. Then when he left the crowds and they went into the house, and his disciples came to him saying, explain to us the parables of the weeds of the field. Jesus answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, which we want to tell people that's very Daniel 7 language. It seems like it's Jesus' favorite title for himself here. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And so I just want to say real quick, Dr. Frost, I have learned over time that full preterists either have the devil, being judged at 70 AD, or in Zach's case, he thinks we are the Satan. He thinks we are the adversaries in our flesh. And I try to warn people, one of the pastoral concerns of full preterism is you buy into this idea that Satan is not actually real in terms of a fallen angelic being that is adversarial and wars against the saints, the way that Ephesians chapter 6 says, or they just redefine him altogether. So I didn't know if you wanted to kind of affirm that as what they do is basically the devil's not.
If the devil is who he is, as the tradition holds that who he is, then wouldn't one of the greatest things be if he could get people to believe that he does not exist according to the Bible? Even the Bible teaches that the devil doesn't exist. And that would mean that those teaching this is teaching doctrines of demons, because anybody that comes along and says that there is no, which the full preterist must, because the devil's thrown into the lake of fire in 70 AD. That's it. And here he is sowing. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, this is such an important point, because
It
either
is an
they would
important
say the devil doesn't exist because our flesh is Satan, or he's already judged and he's not around, right?
Well, and
I remember
if Zach says that, I'm shocked that he says that, because I'd like to know the verse where it says the devil is our flesh.
Well, this is the thing you got to understand, Dr. Frost, is all of Scripture is telling us about God's covenant with the nation of Israel, and so you don't have the proper categories to even understand adversary. Remember, Jesus told Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." He wasn't literally calling him a fallen angel there.
Yeah, boy.
But that's kind of the reasoning behind all that. But he won't be able to tell you who the serpent in Genesis 3 is. He can't tell you who the devil is in the wilderness. Those are the unanswered questions, Dr. Frost.
Yeah.
I just wanted to emphasize that point as we're reading through this, because it's so important. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels, which Zach redefines into human messengers. Just as weeds are gathered and burned with the fire, so will it be at the end at 70 AD. So
keep reading.
Okay, I was going to say, verse 41 goes on to say, the Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all, this sounds really important, all causes of sin and all lawbreakers. And you know what I'll try to point out here? In the Jewish mind, you know who they probably would first think about? Those Gentile dogs that break God's law. I'm just going to say. Verse 42, and throw them into the fiery furnace at 70 AD. In the place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear.
So if you're a full preterist, do you believe that right now that you're shining like the sun in the kingdom of your Father?
Covenantally, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Clearly, John sees the same thing at the end of the 1,000 years here that's being thrown. And then you want to say all prophecy and emphasize all, and the word all. And here it's all lawbreakers and all causes of sin.
It's all in the first century.
Here. Yeah. Well, that's what they do. That's what Preston and others do. Gather out of his kingdom all Jews, all apostate Jews. They're going to gather out all Jews in Israel. So here kind of get a little anti-Semitic kind of tone going on, which I've noticed some full preterists. But see how they have now. Let's use Zach's methodology. How would the first century person, as Jesus lied, all lawbreakers and all causes of sin is clearly not done away with in 70 AD. Is Jesus a liar? Anyone can play that kind of game. But what does Zach do? Because I'd like to know the verse where it's telling him that all causes of sin, all lawbreakers, and thrown into the fiery furnace, and then the righteous. So Zach shines like the son of his kingdom, of the kingdom of the Father. You have to do a lot of reinterpreting of this. Very simple first century audience would have understood exactly what Jesus was saying here. Go read the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is language that's right straight out of they're looking for a indisputable act of God where there's no more debate. God has finally manifested like the light of creation, and that's it. All lawbreakers and all causes of sin will be removed. But they have to say, well, that's not talking about all. It's all apostate Jews and Judaism and the old system, all causes of sin in the old system, and all lawbreaker, and it gets into nonsense at this point.
Thank you for bringing that out, because I mean, you've talked about this, studied this for myself. It definitely boggles my mind.
Y'all hear that? The end of the age was when the temple went down. Frank, you've not thought about eschatology enough, brother.
Zach may have a point there.
The end of the age, the resurrection happens. The resurrection and the end of the age occur at the second coming of Jesus. You just gave the whole farm away, buddy. This is why Ken Gentry.
I think he took that from you. I
That's
think
nice.
he's
Yeah,
maybe
that's what I
kept
just
tabs
said.
on us over the past couple of years. In fact, I know he has. So, yeah, I think he took that from you,
Yeah.
Dr. Frost.
Splits the questions in the discourse and places the end of the age in mine and your future, because he knows if you give up the end of the age, it is over. It's in
So, yeah, I mean, we have to agree. In
Oh
fact,
yeah.
I want to bring up the scripture. So remember, you got either 2 questions or 3. You might have a better insight to what that looks like. But I
It
remember
could be
Ken
2, it
Gentry,
could be 3.
have we missed the second coming? He kind of took the stance here in Matthew's account. You got the what question? What will be the sign of your coming? And let me back up. You got the when question. When will these things be? Hey, there's a book written about that. When shall these things be? Right?
Great book.
Was it Matheson? Yeah, I'd highly recommend it.
Heath
Written by
Matheson.
multiple authors. In
And
fact,
they
is
critique
that
me. Charles Hill critiques me in that book.
now
When I was a full
Sullivan's
preterist,
book,
they wrote
House
that book.
Divided? Is that a response to When Shall These
Yes.
Things Be?
That was
Okay,
a direct response to that book. Yeah. Yep.
It's funny. Let me see.
Do you have it?
Yeah, yeah, I got it somewhere.
You should
I think
have
it's
it.
on that bottom shelf. But yeah, Sullivan got mad at me when I wasn't converting to full preterism. He wanted the book back, and I said, "No, I think I'm going to keep it."
Oh, you
So
have the House Divided book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I read it. Read it a while back, and to me, and I have to say this: the way that he has to try to walk through 1 Corinthians 15 about the dead being Old Testament saints in
Oh, yeah.
Hades.
That's
That honestly, I felt myself getting frustrated, Dr. Frost. Now, was that the view that you held to back in the day?
yeah, pretty much. Yep, pretty much. We were arguing old system,
It just,
old covenant system. So the old covenant Israelites who were not coming to Christ were the dead.
it's just not even plausible. Anyway, so
No, it's not. But
talking about-
as I write in the book, Exegetical Essays, you first have to understand the time text.
right.
Yeah. And I'm sure probably Zach will say this when he says you've just given us the whole farm. He's linking resurrection of the dead to the end of the age,
Yeah.
which is correct, by the way. The end of the age that's resurrection. That's exactly what First Temple Judaism expected, is resurrection.
Now, we're a little off script here, but I do want to ask you this.
Go ahead.
How important is the resurrection with the end of the age? And I know someone that wrote a commentary on Daniel, but how important is that with Daniel chapter 12?
Very important. Clearly, resurrection is taught there when the bodies of the dust that's in the earth. You're using that Genesis phrase, "To dust you shall return," and he's flipping that phrase, resurrection or rise up out of the dust. So you have sown in dishonor, raised in honor. That's 1 Corinthians 15, which I don't doubt at all that Paul has Daniel in mind, as well as Genesis, which he happens to quote, by the way, in 1 Corinthians 15. He quotes Genesis. So anyway, we're not being exhaustive here, obviously, in an hour and a half program. So I don't want people to think that, oh, they're just flipping through no, there's, we could go volumes and volumes and hours on this stuff.
What do you say to someone that says we are shoehorning a major gap between verses 1 and verses 2, which, by the way, verse 2 should echo in Christians' ears, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall wake, some to everlasting life, praise God, wonderful promise, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So I know some people will kind of get mad and say, well, we're kind
I
of...
wish you could can you bring up Calvin's commentary on that? Do you have
I
that in your
cannot quickly.
fancy, okay. Quickly.
Yeah, in take, was that the right word?
In
Or
take.
swiftly.
Right. Calvin denotes here, rightly so, that this is the promise of those that were of endurance. Those who are endurance are promised at resurrection, they will be raised to everlasting contempt. It doesn't say at that time many who sleep at the other. That refers to the two other verses. I always trick on verse 1 at that time. And then I say, well, go back to 1145. Who's that king right there? and that gets people all, especially the full preterists, because they'll give me 6 or 7 answers. At that time, well, this is where I hate chapter markers and verse numbers.
Got it. Yeah.
Where it drives me crazy, because that's connected to 1145. So there will be a time of trouble such as not has been, but at that time your people will be delivered. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth, many of your people who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to that's John 5:28. There.
Right, exactly.
So this is letting me know that the Israel is not all Israel. Some Israelites will be raised to everlasting contempt. Not all Israel is Israel. That's telling me that right there. The resurrection is telling me that not all Israel, every single Israelite, every single Jew is going to be raised to everlasting life. Some of your people will be raised to everlasting contempt. The principle that comes out of that is not all Israel is Israel then. But he's not taking away from the Gentiles or nations. He's just as Daniel is, just concentrating on his people. But
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Anyway, we could go into more discussion there, but I don't see
Yeah.
a gap in any of that kind of stuff.
Well, I see that kind of floating out there, and so you
Read
gave
Calvin's
a good
commentary.
Calvin's commentary, and then you obviously wrote a good commentary on
Yes, I did.
Daniel. So going back to the end of the age, Zach's made a point that I want to kind of capitalize on is when you say the end of the age is the destruction of the temple. Remember, he said you've given away the whole farm, because then comes the second coming, the coming of Jesus. So remember, you got the when question, which we would say, when is the destruction of the temple? Then you have the what question, and what's interesting is you got the sign of your coming. And so we don't necessarily have the time here to totally expound upon him talking about that, but he does talk about the end of the age. And so you have roughly around verse 36, which does seem to contrast. You got this generation with that day, and there's no timing indicators at all. Yeah. But you have the coming of the Son of Man, right? Concerning that day. And then he says,
we'll go back
in
to
those
verse 35 there, because I connect 35 to 36. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words will not pass away. Concerning that day, what day? Heaven and earth passing away. No man knows the day or the hour. So what do you do with, heaven and earth are obviously here. Well, Zach will come back and say, well, it's covenantal heaven and earth. See, they have to read. No Jew would have heard that. They would have heard heaven and earth, God's creation.
What do you say? What do you say to Zach and those other full preterists that see in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, but that was literal in Genesis?
I think
1.
that Zach is tripped up. He's tripping off getting into the covenant creation stuff.
Oh yeah. Are you saying it's a matter of time?
Yeah.
Yeah. So continuing verse 36 onward, you have the coming of the Son of Man here. Yeah. And then you have essentially this depicting the end of the age. Do you recall? Does he bring up that terminology again?
Covenant terminology and all that kind of stuff.
Now
notice verse 38. For in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered into the ark. So was Jerusalem there at May of 70 AD? Were they eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, just business as usual? Mark has a little bit more things. He actually says in conducting their business as usual. That doesn't look like. Does that look like calamity to you?
Dr. Frost,
it's like eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage.
Levirate marriage did cease by 70 AD. Have you ever heard that one?
No.
All right, remember it's the Jewish context, right?
It's just right. That's probably written somewhere.
All right, we're getting close to the end of the video with Zach, but we're showing though, if the end of the age was the destruction of the temple, then right here you got the coming of the Son of Man. And so we do want to bring caution to say the destruction of the temple, that was going to happen with this generation, but there is that day the end of the age, that last day that John 6 talks about, no one knows when that day is going to come. So is that fair of just emphasizing that
Yeah,
point?
and then you have to go back if you are as well as I am, and Donnie Badinsky, I love his work. I'm a universal flood guy, right?
Not a
Here are the
covenantal
days of
flood?
Noah, and there'd have to be you'd have to argue for a mere local flood, because 70 AD was, that wasn't, what was that? That wasn't universal. And here's where you got to go. Well, it's the system. It was the universal system of death that held everyone captive. Well, if death has been destroyed, well, it's not been destroyed for everybody. Those on the outside, it's still active. So is it partially destroyed? Is it fully destroyed? Is it kind of
Spiritual
destroyed?
death.
It's spirit. Yeah. See, this is where you start getting off into all of this stuff. But one last thing that you mentioned was the Great Commission. There was the end of the age again at the end of Matthew's book. I'm with you always. So he's with them before the end of the age. I'm with you always, even unto the end of the age. And what a wonderful promise, not only to Matthew's readers, but to the generations and generations that came. I'm a reader of Matthew. And that's letting me know the end of the age has not yet happened, where all lawbreakers and all that causes sin has been removed. Heaven and earth has not passed away. And yet Jesus here is saying, I am with you always, my followers, those who believe and have faith in me. I've written these things, John says, so that you might believe, his readers. Well, how many generations of readers are there? When I read the Gospel of John, the Holy Spirit uses that gospel, and I become a believer because of Jesus's words. And it says here that he's with me. He is with me, even unto the end of the age. What encouragement that is. Well, the you there, that's only talking to Matthew and Mark and John and Nathaniel and Bartholomew. And that's not talking to you. You're just reading their mail. And I lose it at that. I think, okay, well, then none of the Bible applies to us. So what are you trying to apply to us today?
And we didn't even begin to touch the book of 1 Corinthians that literally has the two-age model of this age is depicted by false teachers, right? That are Jews that seek a sign, and Gentiles or Greeks that seek kind of esoteric knowledge. Okay, that didn't end at 70 AD. 1 Corinthians chapter 2 talks about how it's perishing, so that entails a necessary end. 1 Corinthians 10:11 talks about a plural ages. And then, to me, I always just tell people the death knell to hyper-preterism is 1 Corinthians 15, where Jesus is the first fruits. He physically died, physically resurrected, and said, oh, yeah, that is your blessed hope, because when you physically die, you will be physically resurrected, and when then I return, I will defeat the last enemy, not spiritual death, but the physicality of it, and restore all things to God the Father.
You weren't spiritually buried?
That's why this is frustrating, and I had to take a break from beating this dead horse. I got plugged in with Dr. James White and some of the guys at Apologia and was able to do some other endeavors. In fact, I'm about to do a debate on Chris Arnson's program. In the next week, I'm about to debate a Church of the Nazarene and other. My point is, I feel like we can put full preterism to death, but the internet has allowed this movement to fester. So it's like, okay.
Fester is a good word.
Say again, fester?
Fester. Uncle Fester. In the Addams family, Uncle Fester.
Oh, goodness. But Dr. Frost, thank you for your time. I mean, we kind of hammered what we needed to, I think, and trying to let people know, the debate, especially with all of the discourse, whether you're looking at Mark's account, Luke's account, or Matthew's account, is you do have to contend for the end of the age. And, we would say there is typology going on, but you need more context there. So,
absolutely.
Dr. Frost, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any parting words before we meet again?
No, just looking forward to this debate finally with Mike Sullivan and Don Preston, and hopefully we can, hash out we're currently just hashing out the details. We just began, actually, I think 2 days ago, if even that. So it's not something that's going to happen next week or next month or even a couple of months from now. I'm not seeing that happening. But hopefully, within the year, if it's an in-person debate, we're open to that. It doesn't have to be at Jeremiah's church. It would be at a neutral area. There would be a neutral moderator. Of course, all of those
Exactly.
types. We're not going to try to, this is an opportunity, I think. So we don't want to do anything that could be accused of being manipulative or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they had their little full preterist conference in my backyard. I don't know why we couldn't get that same venue or a similar one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, something like that. We're open to anything. So.
Yep. Well, me and you will keep in touch. Thank you so much, Dr. Frost, for coming on.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless.
And thank you, everyone that tuned in this evening to talk about this very odd topic. I've had a lot of people say, Jeremiah, why? Why do you even talk about full preterism? What you have to understand is my apologetics heart and ministry is kind of geared firstly towards the church that I serve at and pastor and elder at 12-5 Church. And so full preterism has been knocking on our door here in Jonesboro. So I have scoured a lot of resources, and there's not a lot of tools and not a lot of content out there. I mean, it's taken a while for me to find any good books fighting, warring against hyperpreterism. So that's where it led me to Dr. Sam Frost, and we've struck up a good friendship. So thank you all for, once again, tuning in and for your support. Thank you, Georgia, for a super chat. She got me excited all over again when she sent that in. But yeah, if you like seeing the debates that I'm able to engage in or host, appreciate monetary support. And like I said, if you're not able to do that for whatever reason, just please keep me in prayer that I would deal wisely with my time, contending for the faith, loving my family here at home, the babe of all babes, Allie Nortier, and the apologetic puppy, JJ Nortier, which, by the way, he's coming up. His birthday's coming up, so super excited about that. But thank you so much, everyone, for your love and your support. Have a blessed rest of your evening.